Right. Hello, everybody. We are back to coding boot camp with Hired Labs in week 5, and we're going to get into my favorite part for sure. I didn't complain a lot last week, even though I'm not a huge fan of front end things. I really prefer back end development and design. Again, this isn't a design course. We're going to focus on the development side of it. Today, we're going to be talking about databases at a very high level, how they pertain to web development, what we really need to know about them for web development. We're not going to dive too deep. That's a very deep topic. Many of you that are here know a lot about it already. So we're just going to kind of skim across it and hit the highlights for what we need. And we're going to talk about, we're called CRUD operations, I've mentioned before, but it's the ways we interact with databases through any of the applications that we're writing. And we're going to start writing our first set of these operations. And that's going to constitute our actual web app, is really these operations. So conceptually, let's talk about databases. We've talked about data already a couple of times. So we're going to talk about it in a third way today. The first way we talked about it was how computers understand what we give it in bits and bytes, bits being ones and zeros arranged in 8 sections as bytes. We've talked about programming data types in Python specifically, so the literals like strings and integers, floats, booleans, and then collecting those in some way. We have our variables, which was, if you recall, a named space in memory referring to something, usually some sort of literal or one of these collections like lists, tuples, sets, dictionaries. And then there's functionality in functions specifically. This is a data type itself. We talked about functions that gives us the ability to loop through things and do all kinds of other control manipulation for how the program is run and how our algorithms are run. This gives us the ability to actually start writing algorithms. And the grouping of all this stuff together in the last data type that we talked about, really important one, classes in Python. And we're going to use those a lot today. Well, I guess not a lot. We'll use them in practice today for the first time, really. And it's how Django represents databases is in a class. And so we have to recall sort of things about it. The attributes are like variables syntactically, but they're written inside of classes. So they're written the same way as variables in other places. And then methods are like functions written inside of classes. So we're gonna just kind of see these again. But the way that we're talking about data today in a database sense is the information that's stored for an application. So something that you're using is going to be the input and output of your algorithms, and it's stored. So it's in storage for longer term than memory. So something you want to persist from one use to the next. It's to relate to something real in the real world, usually like customer details, addresses, names, could be audio and video stuff like that, right? This is the kind of thing we're talking about. It can also be streaming information, like real-time stuff that's relevant to, say, markets, if you're doing like an app for stock markets, or if you're doing a social media thing with likes and stuff like that. This is the kind of data that we're talking about today in the sense of data for databases. There are all kinds of types. What we're going to use, what we're going to go through, is what's called a relational database. And relational databases, there's a number of reasons we do this. I want to make sure that we're clear on why we use the things that we use. So if anyone's not sure about what we're doing, why we're doing this one as opposed to other ones, make sure you ask. The reason we're doing relational databases, it's really relevant. It's kind of an older style of doing it. It's still widely used. This could be a whole world of things just on its own. If you learn relational databases, it uses a structured query language, or SQL, which itself, if people make quite a good living off of knowing SQL well and being able to use it. But this is also what comes standard in Django for development. So we have the SQL Lite 3. We'll look at it again in our file structure. It's the development database. You can easily plug in another structured database in the same way. You could use another one, but this is very widely used. So it's a good place to start, and it's also applicable outside of this project. But it's not the only one. There's plenty of what they call NoSQL options that are structured very differently than a relational database. Things that are structured in object-oriented ways, or document structures, or key value hierarchical network, and it's a huge list that keeps going. This is somewhat of a false dichotomy because the NoSQL list here, they're not really related to each other outside of you interact with it in some other way than using SQL. So this is just to say that we're going to be doing a relational database. We're going to talk about those, and we're going to use SQL. But there's lots of other things out there in databases. Any questions here? Cool. All right, so relational databases, we're going to talk about this and get to know them pretty well. The main features of them is they have tables inside of the database. If you think about this whole database, this screen here is a database. Inside of it, there is a table. We have multiple tables, one or more tables. That could be if we have, say, customer data, we would have a customer table that would have rows, and each row would be a specific record. So one row would be one customer, and each row will be uniquely identifiable by what's called a primary key. That's an important concept for a relational database. They also have columns. So the columns would be, like the last name would be a column, first name would be a column if it was the customer table. And that may sound to you like a spreadsheet. It's not a spreadsheet. So you want to kind of decouple that in your mind. If you're thinking about this like a spreadsheet, it may be a handy analogy in some ways. Again, I know a lot of folks on this call are already working with data professionally, and they're not going to, they know this. But if you're new to this thing, and this is very beginner, you can think of databases for application purposes somewhat like spreadsheets. You can even build an application using Google with their app script. It's just like JavaScript, and you can build the whole web app using a spreadsheet as like a database thing. But they are technically different, and they do things differently. They behave differently. One of the big differences is that databases are normalized, unlike spreadsheets. Spreadsheets are just like this big thing that you usually just chunk information to. And anybody that knows what normalization is, we're not going to go through a huge exercise of this, but I do want to talk about it because the app that we make and the database that we make doesn't require a lot of this and doesn't require a ton of design because it's going to be a simple task to do a to-do list. So it's just going to have a few attributes about it, like a title, due date, and a drop-down of options. It's very simple. But if you want to make something even more complex, like a portfolio, for example, you're going to want to design your database to store the information in a way that fits this sort of normalizing scheme a little bit better. So you're going to want to go through this to a certain extent. So we're going to talk about it a little bit, make sure you're familiar with it, even though we're not going to go through a ton as an exercise. So normalization. Database normalization is I'm going to use this Wikipedia article because I was going to make my own examples and try to define this separately, but I think this is great. And also, since we do have folks that are database folks that may know data better, you all now know HTML enough to come here and update this if you see something that you disagree with. So this is the guy that wrote this is somebody that was equally self-taught. And so I'm not going to go through and say that the veracity of exactly the examples he gives is perfect or that he does normalization the perfect way. But I think he uses good enough examples for our purposes for designing an application and showing what this process is for somebody that doesn't know it. So with that being said, the definition here is great. We're not going to read it all. It's a way of addressing certain problems, though. Normalization addresses this set of problems. It's an old idea developed in the 70s. And there's these 4 core things that we're trying to get to. Again, I'll let you read that at your leisure. The idea behind them, though, is that we're trying to design our database to be reliable, resilient to change, and readable for both humans and machines. That's really the goal of this process. So we want to be able to know that the information we're getting out of it is true. We want to know that it can be added to and taken away from without breaking the entire thing. And we want to know that the machine can get to it quickly, and that we can understand it and maintain it as humans. And so that's really the goal of what we're trying to do. So it has some more specifics about assertion anomalies, update anomalies, and exactly the problems it's trying to solve, and how we're minimizing the redesign impact and things like that. And then there's this whole formal process for what we're looking for. And this is the process I'm not going to step through on exactly each of these steps. So you can see it gets very deep. But I do want to walk through the example this guy presents here of a step-by-step normalization to show kind of how something like a spreadsheet would be broken out into what's more like a database, and why we would do that in an application context. So everybody follow me so far on why we're talking about this and what sort of thing we're addressing? Okay. So if we take this first data set here, this initial data set, and we imagine that this is, so it's about books, we got title and author and all these sorts of things. Imagine this is a spreadsheet. This says that it's a database table, but let's just say this might be a spreadsheet that you've got, and you want to put this into a database of some sort. So you got to start arranging this in a way that's going to work better in a database. Now this guy starts talking about identifying the primary key first is this composite. Now a primary key doesn't have to be one thing. That would be an ID number specifically. It could be this title and format, make this unique. We don't have other data points to really verify that. But one thing we want to solve is here in the subject, there's this inner table. We can't have that, right? So it's going to make this confusing for something to try to look up and figure out what's what when the computer goes to look at this. And what we're trying to do here is computer readability. So this table within a table we got to solve for. The way we do that is we break it out into 2 separate tables. One book table that still has our title and format. But then we broke the subject out into a place that just has title and subject together. So now these are all unique lines by both the combination of title and subject. And subject isn't even listed up here. We can just look it up now by looking up this title and find out the subjects that are associated with it by looking at this table. Is that making sense?
Wait, I, I I kind of get lost on that part. I
Sure.
get that first normal form is one piece of information for each cell, and
Yep.
then so you don't want a cell that's got multiple pieces of information nested.
Right.
But does that now refer out to this title one?
Yes. So
Or
what's not really shown here, what I'm going to show in another visualization, is that these are related to each other. And like you said,
yeah.
that it does, they are referenced. You can link them by, in this case, the title. So that's something that links them together.
So did that can you scroll up again? Did that go
Sure.
away then? So did subject it did go away
Yes,
from
it did. That's a good,
okay.
yeah, good call out. So what's happening here is the book, you know, table now is narrower, has less columns, and there are more tables. And that's a lot of kind of what happens when you're normalizing things is you'll end up making much narrower looking tables, but you'll have a couple of them that point to each other, that are connected in some way and related to each other in some way.
I got you. I got you. Thank you.
Sure, sure. And then again, just going through one more of these as an example, and this sort of showing that is the trend, that this is going to compress these things in a systematic way. If you look at this set of data, we have title and format again is like this possible composite key, but we see the only thing that changes out here is the price depending on the format, right? So the ebook is a different price than the hardcover in both cases with both these different titles. Other than that, it's this these records are mostly just like two redundant records written four times. So a way to solve this is to break it out into a book table that now just has one title, and the title is the only thing, and then take a price table that has title and format as a composite key with just the price on its own. So then again, this is just breaking it down into ways that could be referenced later by looking it up in reference to this title from here. If you want the price information, then you look it up from this table.
Why did we become how did we progress from first normal form to second normal form? Um, I mean, does this mean that at some point we're going to be one record and then you got all that?
Like one really long skinny record. Yeah, absolutely. That's I mean it could be. And that's the thing, depending on what
Maybe
you're doing.
not a
Like so
normal.
imagine
Yeah.
a scenario like it depends on really what your structure is. And we'll get to that. That's absolutely a great question. So again, if we go from here and we keep going down, there's I mean, we're not gonna step all the way through this one, but now book is very, very narrow, and we have price and we have author, and say author could be listed here in the book thing, but it has more information about the author, like their nationality or maybe where they're from or other books they wrote or whatever, right? Same thing about publisher. And then we can list genre by ID and then put a name in here and do all kinds of other things with it. So there's a way for us to expand this information out in other ways so that we have more detailed information, but in more tables. So spread out more tables that aren't just as wide. And if we jumble this into one thing like a spreadsheet, it would just be like this huge, massive spreadsheet of nasty looking information. So yes, Greg, to your point, it will sort of end up getting skinnier, but as it goes, you end up doing linkings and this can get really complicated. The end goal, though, is again, with keeping in mind that you're trying to make this readable and usable, is you're going to try to make something matching your design according to a schema. So we have an example here of something that is really common. It's called a star schema. It's a really common one. And I think this will help nail down why you would do any of the normalization, right? So what we have represented here is a fact table in the middle surrounded by what's called dimension tables. This fact table in blue says fact underscore sales. It has a reference to three different things at the top: the date ID, store ID, and product ID. And each of those follows this line and a link showing a key, right? Because that's an identifying key thing to, say, the date table over here, where it has everything about dates, where it's year, day, all that kind of stuff. And then that's separate from the store table that has the country, the state, all that sort of thing, which is again separate from product. The idea here is imagine this is referencing something in the real world. So some human came into a store, bought a certain number of products on a date. And this fact that happened is represented by this fact table in the middle with the sales. This could happen hundreds of times, and the fact table would grow with how many records it has by that number, but the dimension tables wouldn't grow at all. They'd stay the same size. So that is one of the reasons you would normalize things, is so that Dynamically, you can add, take away from the dimension tables. It won't affect the other ones. Um, and then think again that this has to be stored in ones and zeros. We know that as developers that this is all stored in ones and zeros. So that space differential is important. You don't want to just stack it all in one place. You want them to be able to change size as our records are added and removed without affecting the other ones.
I'm curious about this because I'm just thinking of a real world example. The
Sure.
only place I can get units sold is on that central table. What if I want to break it out by store or by product?
Yeah. That, you know what, man? That is an excellent question because if you want to do that, we have what's called the structured query language that can answer exactly that question. So what we do is if we have our data designed according to one of those schemas, we can use SQL to access that data and do something with it. So to answer your question exactly, and I love that you asked that question because this is what we start with usually, is some sort of business question, like how many TVs of each brand were sold in 1997 in each country, right? So this is the question we have. And so we know that we're looking for sales as the facts, like how many were sold. That's the fact we're looking for. So that's kind of the central part of it. But then we're going to filter on some other criteria. And so we're not going to dig in too deep into SQL. I'm going to show an example of what a query would look like. So what we're going to do, a query is a question that we send to the database like this, and it's going to return to us an answer if we give it the right structure in our question. So this is an example of a SQL query. We're not going to break it down as deeply as we do with Python, and we're not going to write any of this directly. But I want to highlight three major parts of this. It's really important to understand what it's doing. The first is the select part at the top. This is saying what we want to get. So the thing that we want to get, then the from is from which table we want to get that thing. And then where is the filter criteria? So it's like where the data meet this criteria that I give you, right? So again, the important parts are select what, from which table, where the data meets this criteria. This is again something we're not going to write directly, but when we do our views and the things that we're going to be doing shortly with Django takes Python that we're going to write in and it boils it down to SQL doing these things. So we're going to write something very similar, but we're going to use the classes and the dot notation that we're familiar with in writing in Python to reference exactly this. We're going to tell it which table that we want to grab things from. We're going to tell it what we want to grab, and we're going to give it some sort of filter criteria. And Django is going to handle boiling it down to SQL. But because we're using a relational database, SQL's pretty much got to sit in there to do those sorts of things and answer those sorts of questions. So, Greg, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks for asking a very appropriately timed question. That was like I could not have timed that better. I'll make sure to Venmo you later for that one.
Yeah.
I'm beginning to wonder about this guy.
I swear, Greg's not a plant. We're not actually at the same hotel right now. I promise.
Sorry, no. The data stuff always fascinates me.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing. I know. Again, I know there's several folks on this call that are much more well versed in this sort of thing, and it's a very interesting, deep world of this. But this is the kind of stuff that you at least have to have a sense of for the development that we're doing at this end of it, right? So we're going to be able to interact with these things at least at this level. So it's kind of a minimum to be able to capture broad strokes what these things are doing. We don't have to worry about the inner joins and all that. But if you want to get that level, again, this could be your job could be just doing this still. This is absolutely relevant as a work stream, just doing this interaction. Cool. But everybody getting broad strokes like the select from and where are really the pieces that we need to keep in mind is most fundamental. All right. Well, let's move on. So then that takes us to our CRUD operations. So this is really an acronym that is all the operations that you do to a database. I put using SQL up here with an asterisk because it's not just SQL. So I know no SQL databases. This is, again, taking a step into the application level where some sort of end user is doing an interaction. And this just stands for create, read, update, and delete. So you create records, you can read them, you can update them, you can delete them. That is literally every application. That's Zoom that we're using right now. That's this slides that I'm using right now to make this presentation. That's Airbnb. That's literally everything is these four operations and nothing more. So what you as a designer, as a developer are doing is figuring out which of these you're going to create for your users, how you're going to create them, who gets access to what. And we're going to step through that process. We're going to build each of these into our web application. So we're going to start today with read. because it's going to be the first thing that we get to look at. But this is what we're going to build out for the next few days is these CRUD operations. We're going to get very intimately familiar with these. And then Django's role here is really to do two major things. So it does all the table interactions and the CRUD operations. We're going to write them in Python, but Django is going to help those things go interact with our database. So on the table interaction side, there's 4 major steps that we're going to go through to do that each time that we do it. And we're going to do it once today because we're only defining one table. But the first thing is define what's called a model in Django. And that's just a class, a Python class, where the attributes are the columns. And each instance of that class in your application will be a row in that database table, right? So we define them, we create those things, write what they should be in our models. We'll go through that process shortly. Then we need to register those models in our admin panel so we can go into the admin panel that we set up on, what was it, week 3, where we set up our backend, we set Django up. We can go in there and do these CRUD operations as an administrator, which is nice. Sometimes, fundamental. And then make migrations is a step that will create an intermediary file for us to look at called a migrations file that we'll look at today that shows part of the process that Django is boiling down our Python into SQL. It's still in Python. We can still read it. There are times where you may want to adjust this file. So it's good that we know what that process is. Sometimes you want to throw them out. Sometimes, there are things you want to do at the migration step before you commit them and finalize them with the migrate commands. The last step, once you've defined your models, set up all your databases the way you want them to be, migrate is the actual last push into SQL and committing it to your database. So these are the 4 steps that you go through whenever you're creating your backend sections related to the database that you're creating. The CRUD operation is going to follow 4 steps that we've already done. It's just going to have a little bit of the database interaction built into it this time to do the create, read, update, and delete. But we're going to write a view. We're going to map that view to a URL. We're going to make or edit a template of some kind, do some sort of template thing, including adding navigation to the new function that we have. So any questions about this? Is this clear what we're doing and where we're going to embark on?
Yeah, quick question.
Yes.
Is this building on uh what we did last week as far as HTML website, or is it
Yes.
kind of like just a different aspect or both?
It's both. It's building off of that, and we'll see exactly how that is. So the when I say over here on the right hand side, the CRUD operations, this is all going to involve that same HTML template language stuff. It's going to involve a little more of the Django than we did last week. And again, the major difference is going to be that we can pull information out of a database. That's going to be able to give us more of a, I don't know, there's like more of a foundation to play with for an actual application. All we've done so far is serve different templates. Now we're going to give kind of deeper information again with the tasks and things that we can do with those and interact with them in a different way. So it's building off of what we've done before. We'll still touch HTML, but it's going to be using more Python. Does that make sense?
Yeah, this is something that could be done separate from HTML, like if we just wanted only to focus on this
Yeah,
aspect.
yeah. And again, I call that, so like this again, if there are ways, this is really, again, the back end development piece of it. And like I said, I prefer this part of it. This can be a distinct thing from the front end. The only parts you'll really arguably need to do when you make these CRUD operations is make the function for somebody to be able to click a button and do the thing. And then someone else could take over where the button goes and what the button looks like and all that kind of stuff. So that's really the piece that we're doing here is we're making that when somebody goes to our website, they can click a button and fill out a form. So we're like making that form and making the button and making the functions so that some button pusher could come and push the buttons. What we did last week was where the buttons go on the page, how they look. Does that make sense? Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks. Cool.
Yeah, sure.
So real quick, we're trying to do a functional flow basically, and we're trying to design the website
Mm-hmm.
based on how we're going to relocate data throughout the process.
Yeah. So in our case, the design of our database is exceptionally simple. We're only going to have one table. There's going to be a task with like a title, due date, and a status that we can adjust out of a drop down to demonstrate how those things work. But if you were going to do something, even say again like a portfolio, you might have your own projects. You might have the companies you worked with and you did it. You might have the dates separate when you did it, like, and design all that stuff first, and then go through these steps that we're going to go through of making your models, and then building out the front end how you want to make it look. But the front end and back end are two distinct efforts where you're going to design your front end on what it looks like, and you're going to set these functions up as something that they do, and then you marry the two, and that's how you have the complete full stack website. That kind of answer the question?
Absolutely.
Cool. Cool. Any other questions? Right. Nice. Then almost forgot. I really want to highlight that this side of things, the database interactions part, if you notice, it's sort of plural on that side. We're seeing like you make your models and do all those things. Typically, again, that's where you do is you don't want to change a lot. You want to make sure that you've measured several times before you cut on this and commit to your database as few times as possible. And don't make any changes there once you have, if you can avoid it. It's very simple to make changes. The process that we do to set things up, you can go in and change it once you know how to do it. It's very easy. But again, it can have very serious implications. So be careful doing this sort of thing. For training purposes, don't be afraid to go back through our stuff and throw everything out completely. Like if you jammed up on something here, throw it out. That's the beauty of what we're using. So with that, let's go over to Python Anywhere and start actually breaking some stuff. All right, so we're going to start off in a console where our day should usually begin. And who remembers or is following along what our first step always should be?
Activate.
Virtual environment.
Yes, virtual environments. So we use source, reference to the virtual environment name, bin, activate, and then we're going to change directories into the top level root directory from it's my site. And then let's have a look at our project folder and see where things are. So I'm going to do my typical tree command, except I forgot to put the actual flags on here and just started writing filters. I'm going to include the A flag because I want to get hidden files and make sure we got everything, but then I'm going to ignore my PyCache stuff, JavaScript stuff, CSS, and images to make our admin file not too huge. Then if you recall, so last time when we did our front end things, we were mostly focused setting up our static files and manipulating those. And today, again, we're going to talk about our database. So this, highlighting again, is what comes standard when we first set our things up. And we already ran one migration when we set up our super user and whatnot. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to go down into our to-do application. And at the application level, it's going to have this models.py. So this is where we're going to write all of our models and we're going to do all of the beginning steps of our work and get going. So let's go there in files. I'm just going to open this up separately. While I'm at it, I'm actually just going to open my web tab and go to my site so it's there and we can start working with it. So I'm going to go into my site, the GUI to do models.py. All right, now when it opens up, it's going to have a little warning that says that it's imported but unused. Don't worry about that. We're going to use it here in a second. This is how it comes standard with Django when you install Django. You get in every app, the base of it is going to be this models file, and it's going to come just like this. And it says with this little comment, create your models here. You can take that out. You can start writing underneath it. I take it, whatever you want to do. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to define our class using a Python class, the way we did before, just the word class, lowercase, and then give it an arbitrary name, in our case, task, according to the very thorough design that we did. And this is referencing a database table that we're going to make. So there's a table name. It's a task table. And when we did classes before, we just did a colon after this and started doing attributes and things like that. What we're going to do this time is we're going to open and close parentheses, and we're going to put in here another reference to another class that we're going to take from this models package that we brought in here. And the reason we're doing this is we're leveraging what's called inheritance. And so classes can inherit attributes, methods from other classes. That's one of the really cool things about Python classes, what makes them really powerful. And when we get to the end of when we write our functions, we write our views as functions, as we will today and moving forward, the very end, we'll use classes and show how doing that functionality and leveraging is really quick and easy. But that's what we're going to do with models. We're going to take the model class from models.
Is
So that
there
it-
a reason the model is capitalized?
Yes. You tell me. Why do you think that would be? What is
Is
this
that
referencing?
a specific thing that we've imported?
Yeah, but it's what? It's following the same convention that we're following here. I can zoom in if it's not big enough for folks. It is a class. So we're importing a class. This class is defined somewhere. We could go to this Django.db. It's a file somewhere, and there's a models file inside of it. Like this is probably a directory that has this file in it. It's probably models.py, and there is a model class in there, and it's the root, master parent, whatever class you want to call it, that Django wrote that gives us the ability to take that stuff and then do things with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So our class that we define is basically like it's inheriting some of the attributes and some of the stuff that model class can do, and it'll make it like this is the beauty of using a framework is it has this stuff built in, and all we have to do is reference it and then start using it. So that's what that is enabling us to do. Good. All right.
Yeah, I accidentally hit enter after I was typing in source
Uh huh.
/B,
Yeah.
and then it says bin / space boot /, and I didn't know what I was doing, so I just hit quit with the open close parentheses.
Oh, you hit Control
Uh,
C. If you hit Control C, it's what's called a keyboard interrupt, and that should stop whatever's happening. Did that help?
yeah, I got the $$ back.
Okay, cool.
Then I do source
Yeah.
my VNV deactivate. It says no such file or directory.
Oh, you don't have the.
Did you name your VNV my VNV, or did you name it something else?
I don't remember.
So use definitely you can use ls and just list what's there and have a look and look for something called VM, and then use the tab complete when you do source, like whatever you think it's called. It's like for me it should be VM, but I type in source and then I type the letter V and hit tab, and if it's not
There it
there, I'm
is.
like, oh, I'm not in the right place. You found it?
Yeah,
All
okay.
right, cool. Yeah, seriously, don't forget that tab complete. It's really helpful. See, like I'm not in that directory that has it, so if I try to do it here and I'm like V and I hit tab, I'm like, oh wait, it's just banging at me. It's not doing anything. But if I go back to where it is, it'll actually fill in and say, yeah, we have that. So, all right, cool. All right, so yes, so we inherit this parent class model, and it'll give us the ability to do a bunch of cool stuff with it. We're gonna barely again skim the surface on all this stuff, but these are sort of the basics. If you're following the documentation, I'm gonna somewhat skip the step that's in there. We'll circle back to it. Don't worry. We're gonna skip the little status thing. I'm gonna get to explaining why we use that, and then loop back to making it. A little bit more. The documentation kind of follows like if we had designed this top to bottom and we were familiar with this and we were just firing it off. So what we're going to do first is define the 3 columns that we know we're going to have. So our design is including a task title, due date, and some sort of status, which we're going to set some drop-down options to make that happen. So we do those as attributes of this class, which, if you recall, are written just like variables. So we just do the call itself, the arbitrary name, title for the first one. And then we're going to use this models package again. And we're going to do .char, short for character. So character and then field, capital F. And this character field is going to be when people, go to our site and there's a form, it will expect them to write some information into it. That will be the title of this, right? So the name of the task, just whatever it is we got to do. So the short name of the task that we're going to be doing. And this char field thing requires keyword argument called max_length. And you have to define how long you want this to be, how many characters you want to give them. And this is going to be how much space you set aside in your memory. So again, it's something that you can set depending on your application. 100 should be fine for us. 30 might even cut it. But this is one of those places that if you're doing something with, say, like states, and you know that you want to use the 2-letter abbreviation, you can set this to 2, and you could say that's it. And then that is one way that you can reject unusable data, is just to set a max length so that stuff that's too long won't get stuck into your database. And again, this is required when you're using character fields, which are very, very, very commonly used for all kinds of these things. So that's how we set a title. So again, the next thing that we want to do is a due date. So we're just going to use the word due because it doesn't, we know it's going to be a date. That's all right. And we once again use models dot to reference the models package and import some sort of functionality from it. And these are all capitalized again in camel case. So they themselves are classes. So these are class references. So we're going to do date field. So capital date, capital field, all one word. And this doesn't take any required arguments. So we're just going to open and close the parentheses. There's all sorts of things you can put in there. You can look up the date field and you can change its behavior. And there's lots more we could do with all of these. But we're going to do the very basics just to get us rolling. The last thing we're going to do in our design is a status. And we're going to set that to, once again, a models dot. And we're going to use the character field. Whoop, capitalized. Both the C and the F capitalized. We're going to include the max length like we did before because we have to have a max length. We'll make it shorter this time because we're going to give it a specific set of choices to use. So I'm going to also pass this optional keyword argument called choices. And then I'm going to give it in all caps statuses. So that indicates that it is actually a variable, but that writing in all caps shows us that we treat it as a constant for humans. But again, Python doesn't have real constants, so it doesn't change how it behaves. And we haven't made that yet. We'll go back and make it in a second. But we're also going to set this to, we're going to give it a default. So because we're going to have these choices, we want to default to do, because that's what it's supposed to be doing when we make a new task. We want the default to be to do. So we could set this default on pretty much any one of these. I think that's a really handy thing to use. This is also really good to know for if you expand this in any way. Once we go through this step and you're like, hey, I want to do other things. Oh, now I want to add another attribute or something like that. It'll usually say, well, we need to add a default now for the ones that didn't have a default before, because all the old records won't have that new column, whatever it was. So default is a handy tool. All right, so now in our case, we have to make this statuses thing. So what we've done here, we could have, with the size of app that we're doing, we probably could have just listed our choices directly here. That is an option. But again, even at this, even if we have two choices of just to do complete, even if we added like in progress or something like that, this would get really long doing that. So it's typical that we break it out other places. And we can take this as far as we wanted to. We can put this in a totally different file, completely outside of the class entirely, as far as we wanted to go. We're just going to put it up here above our other attributes and just make it another attribute in all caps. So statuses. And this could be any number of things. So this could be a list. This could be a dictionary. We're not going to get deep into why you would choose one over the other. We're just going to do a list that is going to contain tuples. Now, I know we mentioned that we're not going to use these a lot. This is one of the uses for them. In here, we're going to pass it two things, two strings in our case. And I'll call out that this is a totally reasonable way to do this, a totally reasonable pattern, but it's a bit of a hack. So sometimes it's somewhat of a best practice to actually write variable names in the front, but writing strings twice here is again, first of all, it's acceptable. Second of all, it's going to make referencing it a little bit easier to understand when we do the front end stuff later. But, I don't want to be seen as advocating this is like the absolute best practice. But what we're going to do is two strings of the same thing, complete as one string in a tuple. And then we'll add our to do. And we'll write it exactly the same way as our default, because this is the default, right? And so now we can expand this to add more statuses if we wanted to without having to change anything down here and without making this line any bigger. And again, we could completely move this entire reference out into a separate file and import that file and have tons of choices. And this is just a way to make it more expandable or extendable, whatever choice of word you want to make. But this is a fairly well-defined model. Any questions about this so far? Right. Now, the last thing that we want to do
I
as
have
a
a
standard.
question.
Oh yeah, shoot. What's up?
Can you explain again why you use the tuple? Why is it like complete to do?
Yeah. So this first one is actually what is stored in the computer and what the computer references, and the second one is what's displayed out and referenced as its data. So they could be two different things. The reason I did it twice as the same thing is because it's possible you could do that this way and it's an acceptable way to do it. But it's because it'll make it a little bit easier to present on the front end. I don't have to show how to differentiate between grabbing one versus the other, if that makes any sense. The computer's going to require two things, though.
Okay.
Is that helpful?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Any other questions about this? Why we did what we did? Because, again, sometimes the things we do here from here on out are going to be choices, and sometimes they're going to be best practices, and sometimes it's going to be required. So I want to make sure that we're really clear on which ones we're doing at which point. And if we're unclear, definitely ask. All right, cool. So the next thing we're going to do before we move on from here and move on with our next steps of committing all this and pressing on with the next steps is we're going to add a method to give us some information so that this is easier to read in places like the admin panel. So what we're going to do is we're going to define our method down here. So we do DEF, and this is a built-in method or an expected one in most classes, not just models. So this is double underscore str, short for string, and then double underscore. Then like all methods, we have to pass self at a minimum as an argument because we're talking about class. So the self is necessary. So double underscore str, double underscore, and then in the parentheses self, colon, and then we're just going to return some kind of string. But we're going to use our formatted string that we've used before when we did our classes in the past. So we do F and then our quotation marks. And that'll let us pass in curly brackets our self.title. Then we say comma, and another set of curly brackets, self.status. So now in our admin panel or some other places that we may look at this thing and see this thing once we make a task, it'll give us this piece of information about it. It'll look for this string. It'll say, all right, cool. If it's got one, it'll return the string to us. So we'll have something to read. If it doesn't have this and we don't define this, every time we make a record, it'll just give us a generic, like, couple of brackets and a hexadecimal value that says that a thing exists in the database, but it won't give us anything human readable to use. So this is going to give us a human readable piece of information that we could tell it to use for certain things, right? So we could grab any one of these attributes, we could do different things with it, but that's the purpose of this string here. Make sense? Questions about that? All right. So in the same vein, with the admin panel and visibility, so we've done, if you remember the steps, we have to define our model. Now we've done that. So we've defined that. So I'm going to save this, and that error should go away because now we've used this import right here. So we're good. So we're going to save this, and then we're going to go over to another built-in file. It's in this similar as in the to-do directory. So I'm just going to click back on to-do. So right alongside of our models up here is admin.py. So I'm going to go to admin.py. And this is the second step after we define all the models that we're going to do. We have to register our models. And that's telling the admin panel that we have this model available to it, and now we can go back there and interact with it once we do that. All right, so if you recall, we go to our site, we should be able, when we type in admin, man, let's see if I actually remember the password I made. Don't look at my secret code. And then so if we log in here, remember we have this already. And what we're going to do when we register some of our own things, we'll be able to see the stuff that we register on this site here and be able to manipulate and do some stuff with it. So let's do that real quick. So the first thing we need to do, take this out because we don't need that. We have to import the models that we have. So from dot, which is referencing the directory that we are currently in. That's a universal sort of thing. Dot models. Just the name of the file that we have it in. We're going to import, and then we could, there's a couple of ways to do this. We could just do an asterisk, take everything in. That's not a good idea. We're going to specify which models we want to take in explicitly, so capital task. And then we could add, if we had several, we just comma separate and add more. But we only have one to add, so that's totally cool. And then each one of those tasks, or each one of those models that you import, you have to do a line of code that says admin admin.site.register. And then give it that name of the model that you want to register as its argument. So admin.site.register, then the name of your model that you imported. And that's it. So now we have it registered. So if we go back to our admin panel now, I'm gonna refresh the code, even though we haven't done the next steps, right? So the next steps are making our migrations and migrating into the database. So we haven't done those steps yet, but we've done the first 2 out of the 4 steps that we're going to cover. So we've defined our model and we've now registered it. So let's see if that made it available to us yet. And it did. So when I refresh after reloading back in my admin panel, I see that this popped up as all caps to do. And that's the application name, if you recall, right? And then tasks, it added the S for us, but this is our table name. And we have add change, so we can adjust the table name and stuff like that. But if we click on this, we get an error. Like womp womp, don't do that. So this is the piece that we need to finish up. It tried to go get something using the request method, but there was nothing there to get. So we have to go finish up the steps and actually make the database table. But now we see that we have registered on our admin panel. And so it's there. Right. Any questions up to there before we go through the next 2 steps?
Mine broke before.
Uh-oh.
When I reloaded it, it just says something went wrong.
When you reload it here?
Right.
And it doesn't, you can't get to this point? Okay.
No.
All right. Do you have any errors on this part? Because the only files that we've adjusted so far are this and the models.
Not on the admin.
Admin's cool? All right, here.
Yeah, admin's cool.
All right, check out your models. Your models generally look...
I have an X next to line.
If you want me to hop in and look at yours?
Oh, I see.
You see it? All right. You got it figured out?
Think so.
Mine's not coming up either.
Uh-oh. Is yours not coming up or you get an error, JT?
Saying something went wrong trying to load the website.
Okay. Do you want me to have a look at yours or do you think, because it's either here, if it was working before we started, the only changes we made are here where we define this model and in the admin.py.
Right. Models.
Daniel, did you get yours unstuck?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I used a various regular parentheses and curly brackets. I don't know what I was doing, but I changed it.
Okay. Okay. Cool.
I don't see what I'm doing different.
You want me to have a look real quick?
Sure.
All right, let's go. Let's go have a look. All right, so I'm gonna hop into your files. My site. To do. Models. All right, so there's no errors. That's good. Stop models. String self status. Okay, I don't see anything glaring that jumps out. Let's go see what your admin says. Task. Okay. What is your... I'm zoom too far in. Let's see what your site's telling us. Womp. All right. Anybody else stuck? Or has everybody else gotten to that point? Choice. Ah, okay. So keyword argument choice. So I must have overlooked something in... Where do we call choice? Again, we've only edited 2 files. So you only got 2 choices. Ironic. But I missed this. But this is a really good error. I see it now. But this is, again, this is going to be common throughout this entire process, this specific error. So I'm in the place where we referenced that. And remember, it said choice. So where is that on here?
Choice.
Is it because you have the statuses?
Oh, yes and no. It is exactly the plural or lack thereof for choice. It should be choices. And so
Oh,
choice
okay.
isn't something it recognizes.
Okay.
So it's just the S. And so again, this thing between if we're talking about one thing or two and the S or not S, like seriously, is such an opportunity to break things here. But so this JT, I think is your problem. If you just change this to
All right.
choices, give that a shot. I'm gonna slide back over to mine.
there, see if something comes up.
See if that works.
SQL can be so esoteric.
All right.
What's that?
No, I was saying SQL can be so esoteric at times. It's
Oh yeah,
crazy.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
All right. Do I remember the password?
That's the second question. If you're stuck at that point, though, we're gonna. So the remedy for that, again, anybody that may be stuck there, just make another super user, the way we did before. You just do the Python 3 manage.py create super user, step through those steps, make a new password, and you can log right in. But if you can get to that point without it breaking, then I'm sure you could keep going. So what we're going to do is we're going to press on with migrating this and finalizing it so we could hook up the next part and do the CRUD operation and close it out for the day. All right, so we're going to slide over to the third step here is to make a migration. So we're going to do that in our console, and we're going to use the manage.py as the entry point and run that command. So we do Python 3 space manage.py, again, using tab complete to make sure that we're in the right directory. We have our manage.py. And then we're going to do make migration, all one word, all lowercase. And when I hit enter, oh, it's going to say wrong because I forgot the S, make migrations. Just talking about how that's a common thing to do. And then there I go and do it. All right, so when I actually type the command properly and say make migrations, it's going to tell us which things are going to be migrated. And so it's going to give us this directory. It says to do /migrations, and it'll give us a file. That's always, the first one is always the 0001 underscore initial.py. It's always going to be the first one. And then from there, it'll give it some sort of descriptive title based on what's in there. And it'll tell us here what's going to be done in this migration. It's like, all right, cool. We're going to create a model task. Now, if we go to our files right now, we have a look. I think it should be in there. Now we have our migrations directory. And then we have this initial.py file in there. Before it was empty. I forgot to show that before, but it was empty before. Now we got something in there. And what we have in there is, again, there's all this stuff. I don't recommend that you make any changes in this. This is just to show you, just have a look. You can absolutely look, but don't change anything directly in here. This is what was generated. It's generated by Django up here on the very first line as a comment. You see, this is just Python. And it's doing a little bit more than what we did, but it's using the stuff that we use, right? So here's the name, says task. Here's something that says fields. You know, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on here. And this is one of the, again, the intermediary steps to boiling down to SQL. So we've made this migration file with that command, make migrations. Now we're set to actually commit that into our database.
Hey Jeff, I got a question. I'm not sure if I'm in the right directory. Because it's giving me an error whenever I make my migrations.
What error is it giving you?
Let's see again. It's telling me Python 3 can't open file. File directory.
Yeah, so definitely check the command in your manage.py. So you should have your manage.py file. You should be in that directory. So you should be at your top level my site and go through that at that entry point. So, you know, a couple ways to check. The tab complete's really helpful. Don't forget ls. Look for the manage.py. Make sure you're in that right directory. And then again, make sure you spell make migrations right, because if you just misspell it, it says there's no. But if it said there's no file, then either you're in the wrong directory or, well, you'd have to be. Are you in the directory with your manage.py?
No, does not look like I am.
Okay. So yeah, you need to move to your top level directory. If you followed our naming conventions, you can just do cd ~/ my site from wherever you are. and it'll take you there, or whatever the name of your top level directory is. If you name
Could you
something.
just do my site, or do you have to do the tilde?
You should do the tilde because again, that's going to be sort of the absolute reference to where it is. All right, Greg. See you later, man. Good luck with the party. Yeah, so you should do the full thing because if you just do my site, you'd have to again be in the directory. You have to already be in the tilde directory for that to work. So if you type in the full path to it from wherever, it'll take you there from wherever you are.
Okay.
That's helpful.
I think I'm still. So I did that. I went to my directory, and I'm still
You went to
getting the
this. And you're still getting the error.
no such file directory on file.
Can we hop over and have a look?
It might be interesting.
All right, let's have a look. Let's see it. All right, let's see. Oh, well, first, if it's saying there's no file, I'm going to check your files. I was going to hop into a console, but all right, so you're going to my site, right?
Yeah.
And then there's manage.py. My site status templates. Okay, so I mean, you do have it. So then which console you're working in, do you know? Which number are you in? It's 3.6, okay. So where are you?
And I think what it is.
Yeah, so I see where you are.
Yeah.
All right, so check your directory, man. That's definitely, you're in your virtual environment directory. So do cd, then do tilde slash, or yeah, you can do that. But if you just do tilde slash and then my site, it should take you right to that from wherever you are. No, well, okay, that's home. Now just do, now you have to cd into my site. Yep. Boom. Now you should be able to run the command. There we go. Beauty. All right, cool. Then I'm going to go back.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. All right, so last step here is to actually push this into our database with the migrate command. So similar, we're going to do Python 3, so in that same directory that we just got to. We're going to do Python 3 manage.py and use tab complete to make sure that you're there. And then migrate, all lowercase, by itself. We hit enter on this. It's going to say operations to perform. It says apply all migrations. Then it gives you the full list of all the stuff that could possibly be in there, but it's only going to apply the changes and whatever you have. So it's going to say the name of the app dot and then the name of the file or the migration file that you're going to use. So to do dot, and then it'll give you a little status says okay. Green okay is what we're looking for, and then we know we're good. So once we did that, back in our site admin here, if we refresh this, I don't, if we need to reload the server side, let's try it without, see what happens. So go to my tasks. We don't, so we're good. So now it actually works to where I open this up and I have, without breaking, an interface that I can add tasks. There's a little button up here. It says I have 0 tasks. I can add one, and there are the things that I gave it. So we got a title. So I can put in a title. Got a due date with a little date picker thing on there built in. So we could do that. We can adjust the status, and it has our 2 statuses in there that we put into our status object. So here is a full interaction based on the model that we defined with the attributes that we directly wrote into classes represented as a database. When I save this, it's going to give us, this is that string that we had. So here's the title of the string, and here's the status separated by comma, exactly as we wrote it. Right? So this is the CRUD operations that we were talking about. We can now delete this if we selected it. We can add more. We can update this, go back to it, make changes to it. This, though, again, this is the built-in part in Django. This isn't something we're going to give end users. Right? So this piece of it, this is the first step when we've designed our databases. We've now built them in Python, committed them to the database using Django, and now we can interact with them in a basic way. The next step is to build those forward-facing CRUD operations, starting with read. So any questions on what we did up to here, how and why, what we're looking at now? All right.
So at this point in the game, should I be able to understand what each line of code means, what each like basically like how much understanding should I have versus me just typing in what you're saying to type in?
Yeah, if you don't remember absolutely everything, you have failed. No, I'm joking. It's this is a lot. This is a lot to keep track of, man. It's not. I don't. And that's why I'm going through it explicitly line by line in each piece that we're writing. Because if you were doing a real life project, this would be just a few hours worth of work at the very beginning, after the design phase, to get us up to this point. And this, I mean, this wouldn't even really be. And I'm only saying hours because it would probably be a lot more applications and a lot more to actually write. But to get up to this point on an application this simple, this should only take a few minutes once you know how to do it. But I don't expect everyone to understand it the first go through. Like, these are things that, like doing pull-ups or something like that, require muscle memory. It's pretty much going to be the same steps every single time you do a project in Django. We're going to do the setup that we did at the beginning. You're going to route some kind of pages to use that we did last week, and then you're going to do this sort of thing here. So it's more important, I guess, as a knowledge check, and it's a good question, that you understand the broad strokes of how everything is working and where you plug things in. So if you don't understand specifically each line of code, that's totally fine. You know that you can get the reference documents with the full code examples, and you know where to plug it in your hierarchy of files and what end result you want. That's kind of really what we're going for, is applying what you read and putting it in the right place. So even if you're not writing the code yourself, if you're just copying and pasting the examples, that's totally fine too. And that should also get you to the end point of every day. Does that answer your question?
Yeah,
Okay. Kind of.
yeah. That means I'll just have to rewatch all the videos once we're done.
Oh, and that's the other part of it, man, is that it just takes a ton of practice, right? So like we're flying through, and I know we're going fast. That's the other point. Like, boot camp is fast, so it feels like we're really running through these things. But they are basic things that just take, you have to go through it another time, and then another time, and then another time. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And don't see this 6 weeks as the, like, that's it. And then once you're done with this course, you can't reach out and say, hey, I'm stuck here. I got a question about this. We'll still respond. We can sit down with you. I can look at stuff. You can leave me as your instructor in Python anywhere. I may kick you out before the next one, but you can just set me back. I don't care. Just let me know you're doing it. And
Cool.
to do this is self-paced, right? So like, you'll have the videos will still be available to you. You'll have all the documentation, and you'll have access to the group, and you can ask your questions. So absolutely, if it feels like you're not fully catching it, just stick with it to the end, and then go back through it and do it as you have time.
Yeah, cool.
Cool. Appreciate you, man. That's a good question too. All right, so from here, if nothing else, we're going to switch gears into following that same pattern that we've done a couple of times, where we routed our URLs, we wrote our views. We're going to write some views, but this is going to be, again, a little bit more interactive with our database that we set up. So to do that, we're going to go over into our files, and we're going to go into to-do, the to-do directory, and our views.py. If you recall, we have our basic serving of our index, so our home page and our about page. So underneath the about page, we're going to do another view where we're going to view the task. And this is the first one of our CRUD operations, is the read operation. We're going to call this view task, and we're going to follow functional views like we have before. Even though we could be writing these as classes, we're going to do it as functions first. So we're going to do view underscore tasks with an S, plural, because we're going to see all of the tasks. This isn't the detailed view of one task. This is going to be every task that's in our database. It's going to come up as a list. That's the idea here. And so we're going to handle, like we have before, a request. It's going to have some information in it that we want to use. Now, instead of just jumping straight to our return statement, we're going to have to add a couple other things. So the first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to grab all the tasks out of our database, and we're going to have to store them somewhere for our use in Python. So we're going to set up a variable called tasks, so lowercase tasks, and then we're going to tell it from which table, so task. So this is the part that's going to get boiled down directly into SQL. So we're going to say task as the table name that we want, dot, and again, this is also similar to, again, we're using Python class to represent our table, so it's the dot notation. We say task dot objects, so the objects in that, dot all, open and close parentheses. So it's just going to grab everything that's in there. And then we're going to say dot values, open and close parentheses. And that's going to get the values out of all of the objects that are in there and store them in our tasks object, or our tasks, sorry, variable in memory. So this piece right here is the part that's boiling down into SQL. So this is where, when we start, if we want to do more complex filtering, if we want to reference other things in a more complex schema, this is where we would do it, right? So we would say, this is again where we keep in mind, this is the from section of it. So it's the from, so a little out of order of the SQL statement, but this is the select. So select what? So select all. And then we could put other criteria in here as filters for the where and like exactly what we want back. So we want all the values from these objects from this thing. So the select from and where statement is wrapped up in this. But we wrote it in Python. All right, so that is what we need for that. Now, the other thing that we need to do is give this some way to get this information to our front end to do something with it. Because again, we want to display this information from our database to the front end. The way we do this is by passing what's called a context object. This is a standard to call it context. And it's what's expected. So we're going to go context and we're going to pass it a dictionary. So open and closed curly brackets. And we're going to have a key value pair inside. And this key and the value are going to be, well, the value is going to be our tasks variable, but the key is somewhat arbitrary. We're going to keep it logical and call it tasks because that is the thing that we're going to expect to use in the front end. And we're going to reference that in our front end template to grab the things out of it. So we're going to have this tasks object. It's a set of all the tasks that we have that's going to come back basically as a list. And we're going to say that the value of this is our tasks variable, right? Which we know is a collection of all the task objects out of the database. So this row 10, we grab everything out of the database and store it in our task variable. And then in line 11, we create our context dictionary where we do a key value pair with tasks as the key, which we will reference in our front end to say we want to do some things with that. So we're going to set up for next very shortly. And we'll send that object in the context dictionary. All right, now we get to return. Now this is all the stuff we need to do. If we were going to do any other logic to this or more steps, use more Python to do other things, this would be a place we could do it. So views can get really complex in what we're doing, but for us, this is great. We just need to pull all the things out and have a look at them. So we're going to do return. We're going to use the render like we have in the past, which will take our request, just like it has. The second piece it takes is which template we want to reference. We're going to reference a template in our to-do directory this time. So not at the top level, it's going to be to-do view-tasks.html. We haven't made this yet. We'll go make it soon. That's, again, one of the next steps. And then we're going to, as a third argument, give it that context dictionary that we made so that our tasks are sent to the front end in the context. And that, when we save it, whoop, undefined task. What step did I skip? Anybody?
You have to make a definition for task.
Okay, good. You're thinking about the right thing. We defined task already in models.py, right? So if it's undefined here, what does that mean that I forgot to do?
Got to import it from models.
Got to import it from models. I skipped my own import step. So from the very top, from dot models, just like we did in our admin.py file, we have to do from dot models, import, and then explicitly the name that we want to import. So task model. I'm just going to space it down because, again, by convention, every import's at the top. Now when I save, that error should go away, and we should be happy. So now we have our view, and we properly imported things. So what's our next step in the process? We write a view, then what do we do?
Collect static.
No, we're not doing static files. Write a view. Map a URL. So next step, we write our view. And now we need to tell our URL directory how to find that. So we're going to add another path, just like we had before. So I'm going to copy this again. No shame in copy and pasting. Make your life easier. We're going to change what URL we want this to be. So with this one, I copy the about one. So I'm going to put in, say, to do. This is arbitrary. You say to do list. You say task list. Whatever you want the case to be. But again, keep it as one word or separated by hyphens or something, and follow your structure that you want to use. I'm just gonna have it as to do. And then we change the dot to reference the view that we just wrote. So view underscore tasks. And then our name, we're going to have this as matching the name of our HTML file. So view dash tasks. Again, sort of following conventions with the underscores for function names and dashes for file names. Just keep consistent. Those are, again, following convention, but arbitrary ultimately. And the important part is consistency. So now we've added that. Go ahead.
Underscores for what?
The underscore is functions in Python, or typically that's just like the preferred way to write them.
Oh, okay.
And since we're writing functional views, that's how we reference it. All right. So now that we've mapped a URL, what's the next step in our 4-step CRUD development process that we've already done with the other things? We define a view, map a URL, then what do we do? Templates. We got to do something with templates, right? So it's got to have something, because we reference the templates. And remember, we have the view task.html template. We have to do something with that. So this time, though, we're not going to go to our project level templates, because this that we're writing is all going to be our application level. We're doing our specific application stuff. So we're going to do another template directory inside of here. So we're in the to-do level directory. The documentation, again, is a point where it has it going through the console, which I personally prefer because it's faster, but we can walk through the GUI doing it here. So we're in our /home/hire, /username/mysite/to-do. We're in the application directory. Alongside of our migrations and static, we're going to make another directory called templates. I'm going to hit new directory. Inside of this directory, this is a place where we have a fair amount of redundancy, but there is a method to this madness. We're going to once again make a new directory called to-do. So the same name as our application. Whatever your application is named, I recommend you call it that same thing. So if you did not call your application to do, if you call it something else, name it the same thing as your application. In our case, it's to do. I'm going to hit new directory, and it's going to take me in there. And this...
Why can't you just make a file in the directory we already made templates?
Right? This is, so what's going to happen is when Django looks for its templates, it's going to come in here and it's going to grab all these things for the to-do application. And this is similar to the static files, where you can have all kinds of different templates in here that may conflict with other packages. So this naming redundancy makes sure that they don't conflict with your other templates in other parts of your project, like at the project level or in other applications. So for example, each application might have its own index.html. Remember, we made a project level index.html.
Right.
We structure it this way so that this application can also have an index.html, and there's going to be no conflict there. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So when we set up when we set up Django and we went to the settings.py, we told it to look for all the templates directories as a base kind of starting point to find templates. Remember, we did the baster/templates, and we put this keyword in as a word we're going to use. We were telling it that throughout our project, we may add subfolders, but you always start here to find those things. And the reason that we layer it like this is to avoid conflict in a bigger project. Because, again, you may have several things called the same template name, and you may not even know that because you're using somebody else's, application or somebody else's project thing, or some application from somewhere else. So this is a best practice across Django to make sure that you keep it specifically named for your application to avoid conflict with other file names. So hopefully that makes the redundancy a little bit clear as to why we do it. But I understand if it's a little bit confusing, so you have to ask again. Please do. But in this directory, so we have our to-do templates to-do directory. We're going to make our first template in here, and we're going to call it view tasks, just like we called it before, view dash tasks, plural, .html.
Dash or underscore?
Dash. And that's the reference that we used in our view. So this file name should match that view name, or the template name in the view. In the render call, we say render which template to render. Now here we're going to, similarly like we had done in the past, the about page and all those sorts of things, we're going to use that same base template that we have used. So at the top, we're going to open a Django tag with the extends call, and then the base.html as a string, close off our Django tag with the % curly brackets. And then also, because we're going to be injecting into the same block, we'll do the curly bracket % block, and then we named it content. Since we kept it simple and we put our content in a block, we named it content. We don't have to go back and double check what we named it. So we didn't name it something weird, even though we could have. And then I'm going to close this off so I don't forget with our end block in the Django curly brackets %sign thing. End block is one word. All right. And now we're going to have to do some level of, Daniel, this kind of goes back to your question before, some level of that HTML that we were doing before. Except this time we're going to be able to grab things out of our database and like loop through them and do some more sort of Django-y things to make it look like we want it to. Now, for our design purposes, let's just imagine that we've already laid out what we're going to do, and it's going to be a table. We're going to do a basic table where we have the task title and then its status, and then we can add some other things to it, and we'll click around as we add more functionality. Right now, we're just doing read, so we're just going to put a table on our screen that we can read it. So we're going to use a simple H3 tag first to just say tasks, and this is just a heading. The 3 is a level, like there's 1 is the biggest one, and then H2 is a smaller one, H3 is smaller yet, and so on and so forth, but they're just headings. And then I'm going to use a div that we've done before, and I'm going to go directly into giving it a class, set it to table dash responsive dash SM. And that's going to help us make a table that's responsive. And this, again, is built into the front-end frameworks that we're using that we set up last time in Bootstrap. This might be pure HTML. I honestly forget which attribute this is from, but it works, so we're going to use it. And then inside of this div, we're going to use the HTML table tag. So less than sign, then the word table. And then we're going to give it a class. 2 classes, table and table dash hover. And that's going to make it to where when we hover over it, it does some sort of reactive thing to our cursor where the color will change and we can see what we're hovering over. All right. Now, inside of this, we have to assign it rows in our table. So we're going to use the TR, which is short for table row tag. It'll close automatically. So inside of that, we're not going to add any classes to it. The first row is going to be headers in our table. So table header. And we're going to have 3 of these, which will just correspond to our title. I'm just going to copy this 2 more times. But this is just going to be, whoa, zoom stuff in the way again. So our title, our due date, and the status. Remember our 3 attributes that we have, right? So we have our TR tag, which is table row, and then table headers, aligned to each of the things that we expect our table to have. All right. Great. Now, what we're going to do below this top row is we're going to want to add another row for each one of our task items. So this is where we're going to get back into the Django and do a loop to loop through, grab each one of those things from the tasks thing that we passed in our view as the context. Remember that context dictionary had the tasks item, which contained what we pulled out of the dictionary? This is where we're going to reference it. So we're going to open a Django tag with the opening curly brackets, %sign, and I'm going to close it before I forget, because that's easy to do. And we're going to do a for loop. So we do for arbitrary name, could be anything. I'm going to do task to be explicit about what we're doing. And this is just like a Python loop. So we do for thing that we want to say in, so for task in, and then an iterable of some sort. In our iterable, again, we've already decided this is called tasks. It's in our view. It's what we call the object that we passed in the context dictionary. It has a collection of all the things from our task database table. So I'm going to close this for loop before I do any substance to it. Again, so I don't forget this tag. So in a separate Django tag with the curly brackets and percentage signs, I'm going to do end for. All one word, all lowercase. Now, in this for loop, again, we want to do a table row for each one of these things. So it's going to have its own distinct set of HTML. So inside of this, we can pass it HTML to say, for each one of these things in the database, put it out in HTML, like make this HTML object dynamically when you load the page and include one of these HTML things for each one. So each one of these is going to be its own row. So we do another table row. And inside of it, instead of table headings, we do table data, so TD. And similarly, we're going to have three things because each of these things, each row is going to align to the columns that we have above. Now here, instead of just writing the thing itself, we're going to use some more of Django's front-end template language to grab a specific aspect of each of these task things using kind of Python dot notation that we're used to. But first we have to use double curly brackets, both open and closing, to tell Django that it's going to do its thing. And we're going to say task dot, and then whatever attribute we want to grab. So in our case, title. And same down here with the double curly brackets, task dot due for the due date.
What are the double curly brackets again?
So that is Django's piece of this for the front-end template language. So that's what Django requires to insert this into your HTML. All right. So one more piece that we want to do on this. I'm sorry, Eric, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right, so last thing we need to do with this will function fairly well, but we have to take a step back and say, okay, logically, while we're developing, one of the things that we need to keep in mind is what's called error handling. So a potential for error here is that if there are no tasks in this object, so we're not checking to see if we've got something first, so this will throw an error that we don't have any way of handling if we just put this up there now and say, yeah, man, run this. And if we didn't make a task earlier and it's just empty, it's going to break. So let's fix that using a real quick bit of logic again, where we're just going to do an if else statement where the top part is going to include all this stuff that we just did with our for loop and everything. And then the else is going to be, okay, if there's nothing else, if we don't have any tasks, just tell us that in a paragraph. So I'm going to wrap this entire table in that conditional logic. So up here at the top, right underneath our division, the beginning of the division. Well, actually, I'm sorry. Above that, below the heading, because that division is part of the table. So above the division, we do the whole division. We're going to do an if. So in the Django front end, curly brackets, percentage sign, we do if, and then we'll just do tasks, because remember, that's the name of the object we pass in context. And that's just going to say, all right, if there are tasks, this is just a true or false statement. So if it's true, it's going to enter into this whole piece of logic, and it'll set all this stuff up and give us our table. So down here below this div, where it closes off right before our end block, I'm going to put our else condition. So Django, template tags, the curly bracket, percentage sign, else, all lowercase, percentage sign, curly bracket. And I'm just going to pass a paragraph. So just a P tag, an HTML P tag, and just, no tasks. No tasks found. So this is in case of an empty database where there are no tasks, so our site doesn't break. And then the last thing we have to do, like most things in Django, is end this if statement. So underneath our P tag, we're going to do a Django template tag with curly bracket, percentage sign. Close it off so I don't forget, and put in end if, all one word, all lowercase, to tell it explicitly that we have ended our if statements. We have to remember to do that for our for statements. We have to end the for loop. We have to end the if statement, and we have to end our block. We don't put these ends on, things break. If we don't put the closing brackets in the right orders, things break. So
I got a question.
yes, shoot.
Naming convention for I guess on yours is line 17. You did
Sure.
task.do,
Mhm.
but when we named it earlier, we did due date, task.due date.
Up here.
Yeah. Is it
Okay. Yeah. So this up here is the heading. So we could, this is arbitrary text that we could put anything.
okay?
And this is reference to the attribute that we wrote in our models.py. And so at that time, I decided just to write the word do
Yeah.
to keep it simple. But that's what this reference is, and that's how it's different than this. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay, cool. All right, any other questions? All right, so that is step 3 of our 4-step process, where we did URL, we did views, mapped our URLs, now we've done something with a template. We had to make a template in this case. What's the very last step that we got to do now that we've added some sort of thing to this? The last of the 4 steps.
Delete.
Nope, that's the last of the 4 CRUD steps. Very good. But the last of our creating these steps, we have to write a view, map a URL, do something with a template, and then add navigation to it. So we have to add some way to access this new functionality, this new page, this new template, all these things that we've just done. And so where we're going to do that is in our navigation bar. So we're going to add underneath our home, our about button, there's going to be a way to get to our to-do list as a separate thing and see all of our to-do lists as its own page. Again, realistically, with some this size, you may want to just design this to be a single page app, but we're doing this to be demonstrative so where you can have multiple pages. So first I'm going to say this before navigating away. And then we're going to go to our project level templates. So we go to my site, templates, and we're going to go to our base.html where our navigation element is. And last time we left off where we had our JavaScript hooked up to our delete button. I'm going to take that out because we don't need it now. That was something we're going to use later once we have our delete function actually set up. We don't need to do that for our about button, so I'm going to take that off, delete that entirely. And then I'm going to just copy this reference to the about, this A tag, copy the whole A tag, and then just update it to our evil purposes to get to our to-do list. So the way we're going to do that is we should be able to just change the reference here where it says about to view dash tasks, and then change the word about to something else more descriptive of what it is this will take us to as a link. And I'm going to change it to to-do list. And that should be the last step. Where once we change our URL to be the same name that we mapped in our urls.py, so view-tasks, and then update the actual name on the A tag. And that should be the last step to load this. And if everything went right, once we reload the source code, go back to view site, we have our link up here on our nav bar, like we expect. When we click on it, it should give us either no task found or this thing that says new task with the one that we made on that side. And this is the read out of the CRUD operations that we're now reading out of the database onto the screen in our web application. And we're right at time, actually a minute over. Any questions about that? Anybody, first of all, able
Could
to
you go
get
back to the last thing you were doing?
the base?
Yeah.
Sure. We just added this A tag right here underneath your about A tag. Anybody able to get to that point?
Yeah.
Yeah. You got anything? Cool.
Just had a question. Richmond.
Yeah. 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 Go ahead, man. What's the question?
So you notice how on mine, at least when I go from the do list or about, it asks me if I want to delete the task. Did
Mhm.
we format that in our code somewhere? I'm trying to find it where we did that.
Yeah. So right here, you
To
can add.
ask us.
Yeah. 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 So we can.
Is that line 17
Yeah. In.
in the templates base HTML?
So we can add that as a class to anything. We had this from the end of last class as the button dash delete class on our about tag.
Yeah.
And I just took that off so that because we don't need that right now.
Okay.
But this is where we ended up last time. And you could apply that to really anything, any element you want to, any class in there.
Gotcha. I just wanted to see where we
Mhm.
specifically put that. And I just cut and paste. I wasn't paying attention, but you're right.
Yeah, yeah, no worries, no worries. Yeah. Yeah. So this is where that call had been when we started today.
Good means. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Anybody else? Questions?
Yeah, invalid block tag on line 27. End block expected and if.
Yes. Okay. So this is, let me have a look. Let's see. And you are
DM.
DM. Oh, right here?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right, cool, cool, cool. All right. So this is definitely going to be something in your to-do templates that we made, right? So do templates to do view tasks.html. All right, so I'm guessing that you've got something in your end. Yeah, right here. You see that?
No curly bracket.
Yeah, last curly bracket looks like the only thing I see that you're missing. And that is the unfortunate part about these things is that all these front end languages are going to have just way more of these brackets and stuff than Python. Like I like Python because it's so clean, and I think TypeScript is kind of a move towards that. But the HTML and all this stuff has so many brackets to forget.
So that did it.
It did it. Nice, nice.
I've got an error on line 24
Uh huh.
about
You want to have a look?
kind of the same thing. Sure.
All right, let's have a look. Ariel, were you able to get to the checkpoint?
Yes, but
Excellent.
when I click on the to-do list on my website, I get an error.
Uh-oh. So you got the link to pop up in navigation, but then when you click on it,
Yeah,
you get an error?
I got the same thing. It popped up
Yeah,
at navigation, and then mine
says
did it.
the
Template
the
syntax error to do.
yeah
Okay,
block
interesting.
tag on line 18 in 4 expected empty or in 4. Did you forget to register or load this tag?
Yeah, so you got something that looks like this area right here. It says invalid block tag. And then it gives you a line and it says all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay,
but
cool. So
mine's on
then
a different line. So
different line. All right. So what's cool about this, and what's great about this as demonstration, if you scroll down a little bit, it shows a really good highlight of the actual tech file that it was looking at, and it'll highlight in red where it threw the error. So right here, there's no problem right here where it says end block. Like that's cool. But I'm guessing so there's no intermediate tag. So it looks like you're missing the end of your if. You've put the if statement, it's probably missing. So let's go have a look at that. But this is good, useful. I mean, this has tons of information here. If you keep scrolling down, there's like more than you would ever really need. But this top part right here is really useful because it highlights in red the line that is through the error in the file that you were looking at, right? And it gives you the full directory to it. So it's in template. It tells you which template. So in your view task.html, which let's just have a look at. So to do templates to do view task HTML. Yeah, so you have your if tasks here, and then I'm guessing you just don't have your end if somewhere down here by line like under line 23 probably that you want it to be, yeah, outside of your div. So you want to space down underneath this line 23 and end your if.
So that would be.
I have the end if.
Do you?
Mine says it's invalid block tag for in 4
Okay.
in
So it,
4.
it could be something up here. You want me to hop in and have a look?
Yeah,
All
I
right,
see
cool.
it's here.
All
It
right. Let's do this. See what the error says on yours. Nice. Jason Momoa, good call. All right, so yeah, it's in your views task, and then it says, all right, you have do you see I see what you did wrong here. This actually does highlight what you did wrong.
Capitalization.
Yes, capitalization. So this is not camel case. It has to be all lowercase. You capitalize 4.
oh, okay.
So it just doesn't recognize that as the tag. So that should solve your problem.
All right. Mine's working now,
Working? Nice. Nice.
I think.
Okay. Did that do it for you, Ariel?
Okay, yeah. That
Nice.
was it.
Nice. All right, excellent. So that is the checkpoint for today. definitely encourage you to play around with these things now that you got it set up and there's something more to look at. Next time, we're going to keep cranking on the CRUD operations, and we'll start with create. There's sort of a progression on why we do these things. Create and update are going to be very similar, but create's a little bit simpler, and then we'll go on to update and delete at the beginning part of next week and round out the rest of the app. But this is kind of where we're going. All right, y'all. Thanks a lot for your time and attention. I appreciate it. And reach out with questions along the way. If nothing else, I'll see you Thursday.
Wonderful night.
Thanks, Jeff.
Bye.
Thanks, all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good night.